This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. I'm coming to you from the Cowichan Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island in Canada, and I'm excited to be bringing amazing instructors from around the world to share their knowledge about all the ways that we can keep ourselves and our horses well and happy, and about some of the cutting edge techniques, training, and different aspects that are coming into the horse industry and changing it from within. I'm so excited you're here, and I'm excited about the times that we live in and the shifts that are happening in the horse industry before our eyes. Let's get started. Hi everyone, Alexa Linton here, and you're here on the Whole Horse Podcast today. And today on the podcast, another amazing guest. We have Alissa Mayer here from Oregon. Welcome, Alissa.
Hi, Alexa. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm very happy that you're here as well. And I reached out to Alissa a little while back because I saw some of her amazing work and your offerings, Alissa, and it's definitely a part of my path to work along the lines of, okay, as a rider, as a human, how can I be more balanced in my body and more helpful to my horse, and that seems to be so much of the work that you're doing, which is amazing. And I just love to take a moment here, Alyssa, and if you could share with the listeners a little bit more about your work and what brought you to this work.
Sure. Well, I started, like so many of us in the horse industry do, thinking that I was going to be a horse trainer because I loved horses. And so for a lot of years, I worked as a horse trainer and a riding instructor, although I preferred working with the horses than the humans, but every horse is owned by a human. So I learned that you can't really avoid them. um, so I did that for quite some time and dabbled in some other stuff like natural horsekeeping and facility design and consulting people on that and doing barefoot hoof trimming because when I lived in Hawaii, there was no barefoot hoof trimmer there. So I had to learn to do that for myself. And over the years, I tried everything I could find to help the horses be better because so many horses were in some stage of either being rehabilitated or coming off of some sort of injury or lameness or something. And um, about 12 years ago now, maybe 10 years ago, yeah, in 2010, I came across this really interesting new thing that most people have still not yet heard of called somatics. And somatics is a type of movement based education to achieve mind body integration, which is something I think we're all after. But as a horse trainer and a riding instructor,
Mhm.
this tool, when I discovered it, completely changed the way that I did and still do everything in my business and with my own horses and for clients in terms of how I approach solving problems and actually helping the horses to feel and function at their highest level. So we'll get into more what somatics actually is, I think, in a bit here. But essentially, it's a way that we can
Mhm.
unwind the physical issues that are actually causing what get um, labeled as behavioral issues in most horses. And also, it helps us unwind those same kinds of physical issues related to chronic tension in the rider that are causing riders to have a difficult time riding at their best. And as a riding instructor, um, it was really exciting for me to learn a tool that would help a rider open their chest and ride in a better position with their shoulders back, for example, instead of me as the riding instructor saying over and over throughout every single lesson, keep your eyes up, look where you're going, put your shoulders back, and other things like lengthen your leg or
Mhm.
you're tilting to the right. Can you feel that? And of course they can't because we don't have the body awareness to know what's going wrong or what is out of alignment in our body most of the time. And without that awareness, we can't
Mhm.
correct it. So this tool, Hannah Somatics, allowed
Yes.
me to take riders off of their horse, teach them through this movement education process how to find and using natural reflexes that are already in their brain and their nervous system to unlock and get rid of those chronic tension patterns that define our posture and our athletic ability in terms of range of motion and sensory feedback and knowing where our body is in space. So that when I put them back on the horse, they could actually move forward in their progress. They could actually hear the instructions I was giving them and put them to use because their body was accessible to them. Um, and of course,
Mhm.
the same type of education, because it's based on natural reflexes in the mammalian system. So they're the same reflexes in humans as they are in horses that we can access. We can also help the horse let go of chronic tension patterns that are making them crooked or making their stride a little bit short or causing them to move hollow and strung out from an old saddle that was the last person who owned that horse. The saddle was too tight and it caused them to drop their back. And now that's become an unconscious pattern that no matter how well you ride, you can't really help the horse address it because it's not a conscious thing they're doing, it's an unconscious thing. So
Mm.
learning all of this stuff and learning how to actually help my clients, both the horses and the riders, to not only feel better, but to function better as a team is what has become kind of the core or the secret behind everything that I do now in terms of training horses and teaching lessons and putting together courses for riders and coaching people because it's just the most effective thing that I have yet come across. And that's why I dove in 10 years ago when I came across it and, you know, learned everything I could to use this tool to help
Mm.
the horses in the world, which is really why I do what I do.
Yes, I can absolutely hear that passion as well, and I would love to come back to the piece around working with horses because I know that that was how you began working with Hannah Somatics.
Hmm.
And I know that I encounter as an equine body worker and even in my riding sometimes with my own mares, this how a lot of horses exist in an imbalanced state, like physically speaking. Um, and my sense has always been okay, that more than likely is driving a lot of behavior. The fact that they don't know where their feet are, or um, they don't know where their body is in space, and they're not confident in their movement, particularly with a rider on.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to that piece around working with horses? This is more out of my own curiosity. Um, is so often with body work, you're doing the body work, but there's this gap between that and like the getting in the saddle and actually doing things with the horse, right?
Totally.
Um, and how to fill that gap. Hmm.
So, yes, absolutely. I can talk about that. The first thing I feel like I need to say is that Hannah Somatics is not actually body work. It looks like body
Yeah.
work, but we're not ever actually doing something to the horse or to the human's body from the practitioner side. It's all cooperative movement and voluntary movement based. And that is really important. And the more I talk about it, you'll see why that's so important. Unfortunately, there's not another category, so we fall into the bodywork category. But I think you, as a body worker, are going to find this super interesting because I'm going to talk about
Hmm.
how it works inside the nervous system and in the brain, and why I decided to do Somatics instead of one of the other bodywork modalities or going into osteopathy or something like that. When I found this,
Yep.
it excited me on a whole other level. But I think what I'll do is tell you the story of how I discovered it or came across it, because that um,
Please.
it's just, it's the origin story of how I did this. And it was all because of a horse that I still own today. His name is Jedi, although at the time his name was Jet because his actual name had yet to be revealed. And this was a horse
Hmm.
that I bought to rescue him, essentially, which I think a lot of us have done. um, I got a call from one of my clients that there was this really nice young thoroughbred at the vet clinic down the road that was scheduled to have a nerving procedure the next week. So, if you don't know what a nerving procedure is, it's a surgery that is often performed usually on the front legs of a horse to sever the nerves that give sensory feedback from the lower limb and the hoof to the brain, so that it kind of acts like a permanent painkiller. So for a horse who has a chronic lameness issue, like this horse had, by severing those nerves, the horse usually goes less lame because they can't feel their pain. But of course, when you sever the nerves, they also can't feel the ground. They can't feel it if they step on a nail.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
you can imagine the problems with a procedure like that, but it is something that is done, unfortunately, still widely across the industry to this day. And anyway, so this client of mine really, I think she had been riding this horse for the people that owned it before this happened, and so she had a relationship with him. She liked him. She wanted to give him a chance, but she couldn't do it. But so she thought maybe I could help this horse. So I went to take a look at him, and I looked at his feet. And at the time, I was doing a lot of barefoot trimming and trimming for clients. So I was, in the thick of rehabbing horse feet that way. And so I looked at his feet and I watched him move, and he was wearing these big, shoes and pads and things. But he was really sweet and
Mhm.
really nice. And he's a large horse, and he was in a small pipe panel stall, and he just kind of begged me to get him out of there. So I had to pay off his vet bill to get him out of there, which is how I ended up buying him. But I did that. I took him home, and for um, I don't actually know how long I had him before I. Well, I'll get to that in the story. So I pulled his shoes and I gave him my version of the barefoot trim that I was learning at the time, and I put him out on my kind of dry lot paddock paradise system where I run my herd of horses on a track so that they self exercise, and I started riding him when he was comfortable enough and was able to put him into my riding program on and off, so that my students could help ride him, which is really important for his fitness and developing, a healthier hoof. But he would still be uncomfortable at least half of the time, to the point where we couldn't ride him and he needed time off. So everything that I did helped him, but nothing really fixed him, you know? So
Yep.
then I had this, what seemed random at the time, but looking back, obviously this was like meant to be. This One of my riding students had a friend who was visiting. This was all happening in Hawaii. So uh, a friend was visiting from the mainland, and this riding student of mine was like, hey, I've got this friend coming. It's her first trip to Hawaii. I want to make it really special. Do you think I could bring her to your ranch and we could do a trail ride to the beach? She knows how to ride, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, yeah, I can totally do that, as long as obviously I'll vet her and make sure she's safe to take the horses out with us. But so we made that plan, and the day arrived and they came over. And of course, on that day, Jedi was just having an off day. And I had to say, oh, I'm sorry, you guys, we can't do the amazing romantic Hawaii beach trail ride that I promised you, because this is one of the horses who was going to take us to the beach and he's just not feeling up to it today. And the strangest thing happens. This woman who I just basically canceled on her dream ride, right? She said, "No problem." And she smiled and she said, "Why don't I show you what I do with horses instead?" And she was an equine somatics educator, which I had no idea what that meant at the time. And I don't even think I
Mhm.
like understood what she said. I probably said like, "You do what?" and had her repeat it. Um,
Mhm.
but I said, "Sure." I mean, I was there. I don't usually let people do stuff with my horses that I don't understand, but I figured I'm there and I could ask her to stop if I didn't like it. So she started working with my horse, doing this stuff that really didn't look that impressive in the beginning. Um, she just had him on a halter and a lead rope, and basically like touched his body all over, and asked him to do some like really simple looking things, like picking up his feet and putting him down slowly, and doing lateral flexion with his neck, and asking him to kind of maybe bend through his rib cage, just things that looked really gentle and simple and kind of like nothing. And sometimes she'd just stand there with her hands on various parts of his body. But he just loved it, was giving all the signs that he absolutely loved it. The rope was on the ground, his head was hanging low, he got super sleepy and relaxed. And by the end of an hour, he looked like the horse that I knew he always was, but that I was not able to help him be with all the other stuff that I was doing. And
Wow.
we walked him around a little, and he moved like silk. And this is a horse who, um, I mean, he's beautifully built, but he always looked choppy, or like looked like a bunch of beautiful horse parts stuck together that didn't really match.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, he looked like this beautiful horse. He was fluid. All his parts were moving together. He had this self harmonious quality. He was shining. He had dapples all over his body without being groomed or anything. And I was like, what is it that you do again? Because I've never seen anything like this and I need to know more. And so he felt great. And that is pretty typical of most body work that I've seen with horses. But this is the best part, it didn't wear off. So she
Yep.
left, went and had the rest of her vacation, left the island, and my horse suddenly he was sound and fluid, and had less off days and was all relaxed, and that like smoothness to his movement and to his feeling and his energy, and that like kind of happy, like I don't hurt anymore quality that he had after that session stuck around for like weeks, months, I don't know. It was almost like I forgot he used to be lame, and I was able to put him back into my
Yep.
riding program, and we went for these amazing gallops, which is really fun because he's a thoroughbred, and so he was way faster than any of my other horses. uh,
Mhm.
and it was just like that missing piece to his rehabilitation, and it was this thing I didn't even know about. And essentially, what she did, and the reason it looked so simple, is that in taking him through these simple natural movements that he could do with her, she was getting him to voluntarily contract and also voluntarily slowly decontract various muscles and muscle groups in his body, which is how you get the horse's brain to actually reset chronic tension levels all by itself. So the reason he was tense
Ah.
and choppy looking and kind of like restricted in so many places was because he had chronic tension in the muscle groups that were opposing each other. So he had all these braced joints and stiff areas and sore areas because this muscle tension was there from who knows what had happened to him to cause it. It could have been there for years. And she was able to
Yeah.
help him let go of that stuff from within his own brain and nervous system by getting him to do the movements, which is a totally different effect from the nervous system end than when you do it manually from the outside with, a hands-on movement or a treatment or something, the other stuff that we can do to help with muscle tension. And that's why the effects lasted so long too, was because it was happening from within him rather than something that happened to him that obviously feels nice in the moment, but doesn't necessarily cause that lasting systemic change. So that was really
Mm.
exciting and eye-opening for me. That was in 2010. And I was so
Mm.
impressed with that was one session with my horse. And I was so impressed with that that of course I looked up equine somatics, and I found what I could online, and I found that there was a school in California called the Novato Institute for Somatic Research and Training where you can actually study this stuff. And I discovered that the woman who developed this method, equine somatics, was still around, and she runs the school. She's the education director there. Her name is Eleanor Criswell. So I got super excited because it's kind of rare that we get to actually meet the person who develops a modality, and actually work with them
Mhm.
instead of go train with people that they've trained or something like that. So I applied to the certification program and I started flying back and forth to California to go through the courses, and I got certified. And I just couldn't get enough of this because it was so radically effective with every horse that I tried it with. So I just kept coming back to the school even after I graduated because I wanted to learn more. And I just do that. Like I follow people around and ask them questions and go watch everything they're doing. Um, and
Mhm.
so after doing that for a few years, she invited me to actually help her teach the program. So now I co-teach the professional training course at the Novato Institute with her for our equine somatics practitioner training program that we run once a year. And I'm still learning, but it's still to this day is the most effective way I have found to help horses get out of being stuck, which is what leads to so many of these other things that we are trying to help our horses with.
Wow. Mhm. Yeah, I am definitely gonna be Googling that school after we're done the podcast today. I'm like, that is amazing. Because I've done a lot of training as well. I think we're quite similar in the sense that we both love to learn
Mhm,
and have a real um yeah, passion for helping horses. And I can hear that in this story and the story of Jedi. And it's very inspirational. I think a lot of listeners might be feeling the same way of, oh my goodness, I have this horse that doesn't quite move altogether, or, has a really hard time with balance, has this particular injury that they just can't seem to recover from. So
mhm.
I'm sure that that's really going to kind of pique a lot of interest of, okay, how does this work? So can you share a little bit more? In this podcast, my listeners are great because they've gotten used to me being really geeky and going into the physiology and the anatomy of things. And I would love you to just share a little bit more about the deeper kind of understanding of how Hannah somatics actually works within the body to make these
I
changes.
can totally do that. I love geeking out on this stuff. So stop me if I go too
Awesome.
far down the rabbit hole, okay? um, so the basic way that this works is it's hard for me to do like a a surface level neurophysiology like discussion.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to
Hmm.
start simple. So that's where my brain is going right now. So I'll start by just talking about movement and where movement comes from because without understanding that, I feel like we don't know how to affect it. Uh, so movement is really complex in a lot of ways. So you probably also study anatomy the way I do in a total like horse nerd kind of way. Um, and anybody who studies anatomy knows that
Hmm.
there's like way more than we're ever going to know. Like for example, there are, like around
Yep.
700 muscles in the horse's body, but some books will say 800. And the longer you study anatomy, the higher that number grows because we're learning more about it. And there's not really a standardized system for how it becomes qualified when research in that area becomes published or when people start talking about things um, that they've discovered or the way that they describe things. So uh, you can you can study anatomy all you want, and I think you'll never actually know mm, how our amazing brain actually manages to drive our super complex bodies around with such precision and grace and athleticism. Like for example, this is something I like to have people try with me. Like if you just pick up your arm right now and like go scratch your head with a couple of your fingers, which is something we do automatically all the time, or straighten our hair or brush, tuck your hair behind your ear or something. That's a really simple movement. But now could you possibly make a list of all of the muscles that it took to do that? So, which muscles are involved to lift up your arm and do that? And in what order did your brain have to recruit those muscles to get your arm to do what it was supposed to do? And there's this balancing act too, then. How much did each muscle have to contract or brace or relax in order to get your fingers to touch the part of your head or your ear or your hair that you had in mind? and not touch it too hard so you jam your fingers and, sprain your knuckle, or not miss your head altogether, or slap yourself in the face, or pull your hair. The order of complexity that it requires to do a simple movement like that is just out of this world complicated. Um, but luckily,
Mhm.
in order to do that kind of movement, or any other kind of movement that we do with our body, we have this pre programmed autopilot system inside our brain that takes care of all of that for us. So I think that's really good news. Otherwise, we'd all be like just flailing about all the time, and like life and evolution would not be able to have happened. So, that autopilot system is a series of reflexes and pre programmed movement patterns that are born into mammals, and they live in, or are stored in, or are housed in the unconscious part of the brain, like the back of the brain, the cerebellum and the brainstem. And then there's a series of other reflexes further downstream in the nervous system, in the spinal cord, and actually between the muscles and the surrounding tissues themselves, that participate in being able to do that kind of movement. Um, but I'm talking about all this because the part of the brain that does all of that awesome movement stuff is a different part of the brain than what we use when we practice movement on purpose. And it's also a different part of the brain
Mm.
than the area that controls and mediates the tension levels in those muscles when we're not using them between movements, and that's called the resting muscle tonus. So that's what's going on in your muscles, like when you're just sitting at rest. Like, if you guys could see the way I'm sitting at my computer right now, it's not the best posture, but it's comfortable for me. So the way that we sit when we're at rest tells us about which muscles are actually relaxed when we're at rest, and which muscles are a little bit contracted. And that defines our posture. So, most of us, for
Mm.
example, when we relax our posture, our shoulders and like our chest goes a little concave, and our shoulders slump forward a little bit, and we do the kind of slouch. Um,
Yep.
that's not because we're lazy, or that we just haven't learned how to have good posture. It's because the muscles on the front of our body, around our pectoral area and our abdominal area, are experiencing a mild, or possibly a very extreme contraction that you're not in control of, because it's the unconscious part of your brain that is creating that contraction in your muscle tone. So when you think about it and you activate the voluntary part of your brain, which is more in the frontal lobe, you can totally sit up straight and have perfect posture. Everybody can have perfect posture if they put enough effort into it, but it will only last as long as your effort and your focus lasts. And we find this a lot when we're riding horses, that like, you hear your instructor tell you to put your heel down, or look where you're going, or open your chest and put your shoulders behind you, and that works great for like maybe 90 seconds until you approach a jump, or your instructor gives you another cue or instruction or thing to think about, because your brain can only focus on a few things at once in that front of mind moment. And then we fall back into this pattern. So those patterns of muscle contraction, or the pattern that we see, is the result of chronic muscle contraction that is happening from the unconscious part of our brain, but it's mediated by the voluntary motor cortex, which is more on the front part of the brain. uh, so if that is this geeky enough for you so far?
Yeah, it's so great.
uh,
Absolutely.
so the reason that most of us find habits and postures so difficult to change is that when we do something with the front part of our brain to move our body around, or to practice a new skill, or when we're working out or stretching or whatever it is that we're doing with our body, um, that works to instruct the body to do it, but it doesn't change the patterns that are being held and maintained and generated from the unconscious part of the brain. So we can consciously override it in the moment, like that example of, like, all of us right now. Can you all sit up straight, please? You just did it. So you just used the front part of your brain to consciously override your unconscious posture. But if I don't keep talking about it, in a minute or so, you're going to relax. So go ahead and relax, everybody.
Mhm.
Now you're in your unconscious habitual posture, which is the one that's defined by those muscle contractions that are coming from the unconscious back part of your brain. So you can override it, but you can't actually change it because the two parts of the brain are pretty well separated for a good reason. It's that autopilot system thing. We need to let our unconscious brain run the physical processes in our body because we don't know how to do that. Like the conscious us that we think of as ourselves, we can't handle that. So we need that part of our brain to do that. But the flip side of that then is that it's difficult to get the conscious stuff that we do to influence or change the stuff that's happening in the back part of the brain, in the part of the nervous system that is running the functionality of our body. So
Mhm.
that's all really important because what Thomas Hanna discovered and what we do in Hanna somatics is we actually utilize a natural reflex to hack that two brain system and use the conscious part of the brain to reset some of that patterning in the unconscious part of the brain. And I haven't seen anything else that can do that. And that is why the changes that we get at the end of a session when we're doing Hanna somatics last and even get better over time without repeats of the session necessarily, is because we're actually getting the brain to make real changes inside itself in an area that is really hard to access, or I'll even venture to say that's impossible to access using most of the other stuff that we know how to do. And this is why I said earlier it's so important to remember that Hanna somatics is not body work. We say it's brain work. So we're using movement to get the client, so that could be a horse that you're taking through a session, or that could be your own body if you're doing a self-guided floor work session following along on one of my classes, or that could be a one-on-one session between two humans, a practitioner and a client, where we're actually helping you do the movements, but you're doing them from within your own body. Uh, so we're shifting
Mhm.
the level of brain control from the unconscious to the voluntary motor cortex just during the movement part of these sessions, and then we give it back to the autopilot system afterward. And it's by using this reflex, and I'll tell you what the reflex is so you guys can look it up and geek out even more. It's
Yeah.
called pandiculation.
Oh, wow.
Pandiculation.
I've never heard of that.
I know, right? It's not commonly out there. Even like if you guys go Google that now, you're not going to find a lot on pandiculation. Um, because it's just not a very well known reflex. Like it exists, and you'll find it in like some medical textbooks and some veterinary textbooks and stuff. But it's not totally well understood, which is why I think more people aren't using it. And it's also such a natural reflex that we do that we don't think of it as something that we can use. It's very similar to a yawn. So a yawn is a natural reflex that happens, like it's involuntary. It happens in the involuntary part of your nervous system. You guys know this. When a yawn is coming on, you can't not yawn. You can fight it. It kind of hurts. It doesn't usually work, but it just happens. And it happens because your brain has noticed something, and it just gets triggered. And that's kind of how pandiculation works. So you haven't heard of pandiculation, but you actually know what it is. You see it all the time. If you have ever hung around a cat or a dog for very long and seen them wake up from a nap, you've seen pandiculation. So, what's the first thing a cat does when they
Hmm.
wake up after sleeping in a cute little ball?
They'll usually give a good stretch,
Yes. But
like stretching their limbs out and yawning potentially.
mhm. So there's a bunch of
What am I
variations on
missing?
that, right? Like they can do the one where their back arches up really high, or they'll do that one where they reach both
Yep.
paws out in front and stretch their backwards with their kind of standing on their hind legs. I've even seen them do like one little toe claw at a time, and sometimes their claw will come out if it's a cat. So we call that a stretch,
Yep.
but that is actually pandiculation. And it's not a stretch, it's actually a contraction of the extensor muscles. And that's a really important distinction.
Wow. Huh.
So it's
Because I know I do that when I wake up.
yes, because you are a
I'll
mammal
do,
too.
like, all these stretches, Yeah.
But a stretch,
Wow.
the way I think of a stretch and kind of like the most simple definition is when a muscle or group of muscles is pulled on from either end. That's a stretch.
Yes.
When you do that thing in the morning where you stretch, we call it stretch. I'm doing air quotes, but of course you guys can't see me. Uh,
Yep.
like if you lift your both arms above your head and you're doing that stretch, what you're actually doing is you're contracting your back muscles and the extensors of your limbs to do that. And you do it in such a
Totally.
way that it feels really good, and the opposite muscle groups to the ones you're contracting, they lengthen. But they lengthen passively because of that contraction of the extensors. They don't lengthen because they're experiencing a mechanical stretch.
Totally.
And then there's one more piece to this reflex that's really important. After we do the pandiculation movement that we usually would call a stretch, we come out of it, but we come out of it in this really delicious, slow, luxurious way. We don't snap back to neutral. Think of the cat again when they're doing their stretch pandiculation after they wake up. They go into it. They usually actually like vibrate a little bit once they're in it, which is cute and funny. And then they come out of it really, really slow and they probably blink a few times. So coming out of it really slowly like that is what allows the brain the time it needs to do this hacking where it will actually recalibrate the resting level of muscle tone in any of the muscles that were involved in that air quotes again stretch.
Wow. Mhm.
So pandiculation is a natural reflex. It's a polysynaptic reflex, which means there's a bunch of different things going on. Um, that we share with cats and horses and chickens. You guys might have seen chickens doing this kind of a move with their wings where their feathers get all extended. All vertebrates, actually, not just mammals, all vertebrates do a version of this reflex. It's hardwired. We're all born with it. And the purpose of this reflex is to prepare the body for movement. So after we're sleeping, our muscles have been in a curled up or a shortened state for an extended period of time. And if they're not prepped for movement, then they don't lengthen and shorten as quickly or easily as they would if we just went straight from being curled into a sleeping ball to, say, jumping off the roof if you're a cat. That's why cats always pandiculate after they sleep before they go do the crazy athletic things that they do. If you're lucky, you might have actually
Wow.
seen a horse do pandiculation too, which is really fun to see. But
Mhm.
because we all share this natural reflex and because it's hardwired into all of us and it's kind of one job is to prepare a body for movement by getting rid of that shortened state that we have acquired while sleeping in our muscles, putting us back into a neutral state so that when we go to move, we're ready to either lengthen or shorten as needed. Uh, because we all have that reflex, and because in somatics, what they discovered is how to get a body to do that reflex on purpose so we can use it systematically to reset the whole body. That's why using somatics, we can get the kind of incredible and usually immediate results that we're able to get in our sessions.
Wow. That's amazing. It's so funny because you all can't see me, but I'm over here yawning my face off right now.
That
I
is
just
so
can't stop
funny.
yawning.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm
Well,
like, that's what happens when I learn new things and when things like are really, like, oh that's working for me. So this is obviously like landing in my body in an important way, this new understanding. And I really seriously cannot believe I've never kind of understood this before.
I know.
I'm really in a mind blown space.
Yeah, and I've got more actually that will blow your mind too. But
Oh, okay. Okay. Please keep it coming. I'll just keep
Really?
yawning over here.
Okay, yeah, good. So this is a little bit more about that concept of stretching, and this actually is
Yes.
can be somewhat like controversial when I talk about this. So it generates the fun discussions with people. Um, and when we're doing pandiculation, so when we're doing somatics and we're doing a systematic series of voluntary or assisted pandiculations on a body, that's what we do in our sessions. Um, the One of the principles or the things that we're really super aware of when we're doing it is that we avoid mechanical stretching at all cost in the session, because when you
Mm.
stretch a muscle, it triggers a different involuntary reflex than this pandiculation reflex that I've been talking about. It has a super fancy name. That name is the stretch reflex. And the reason we avoid triggering the stretch reflex in our somatic sessions is because the result of this involuntary reflex, the stretch reflex, is that the muscle that experiences it is automatically triggered to reshorten after it experiences that reflex. So
Wow.
every single time a muscle tissue is stretched, we trigger the stretch reflex. It's a spinal cord level reflex. So the muscle experiences
Yep.
stretch. The tissues are activated. There's little receptors that are
Yep.
studded throughout the muscle tissue and also in the tendons on either end of the muscles. There's this little lightning fast signal that goes from that tissue up to the spinal cord and bounces straight back down. It's so fast it doesn't even go to the brain. It just goes spinal cord and back to the muscle,
Yep.
and it tells that muscle to shorten every time,
Mhm.
which is 100% counterproductive to the reason most of us stretch, right? And it's also the opposite
Totally.
of what we're trying to do in somatics using pandiculation to bring muscles back into a neutral state so that they can either lengthen or shorten easily. Because a muscle that is short is contracted. Those are the same things. It's just two ways of saying the same thing. And a shortened muscle can't lengthen all the way, which means it restricts the range of motion in the part of the body where that muscle is. So if you have lots of muscles that are experiencing some level of chronic muscle contraction, maybe because they got stretched, maybe because they're protecting an injury, or maybe because they used to be protecting an injury and the injury has healed, but the brain adapted to that protection pattern and now it's been incorporated into the unconscious body awareness and body image, so that we now no longer can be aware that we have that we're doing this protection thing. It just becomes part of our kind of normal. Uh, for whatever reason is causing muscles to be in a partially contracted state, it's that partial muscle contraction that is responsible for what I work with and see in my work as um, most of the pain, restricted motion, joint soreness, uh, chronic like poor posture, and it also causes things like uh, pain and fatigue, because a muscle that's shortened again is contracting and that requires energy. So you're burning energy to keep your muscles contracted. So they get sore,
Mhm.
you get tired, you run out of energy, your range of motion is restricted. So then, and this is the real kicker, when you have a little bit of shortness being held in your muscles unconsciously, you're much more likely to mechanically stretch them every time you move, because your range of motion is shortened as well. So the more you
Yep.
stretch, the more you trigger the stretch reflex and cause that shortening in the muscles. And then you're more likely to stretch even by accident just by doing regular movements, because those muscles are already kind of the opposite of prepared to lengthen. So it's this
Yep.
snowball process. Like if you're a little bit tense, you tend to get more tense. If you're a little bit tight, you tend to get more tight. And unless you have a tool that can actually hack in there and make these changes, it's really difficult to get them to change. But it's this
Absolutely.
stretching thing that sets a lot of people off, because we've been taught to stretch our whole lives, but no one ever taught us what happens in the body when you stretch.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I mean, I have many, many questions. So my first question would be, and here we are, like, with, like, 7 minutes left. Oh
Mm,
god. My first question would be, how how does one elicit a pandiculation reflex? Like, what if is there a way to explain some of the process of and then the difference between, because I've been taught to stretch horses
mhm,
as a body worker, and I do my carrot stretches with Ziva and my bows, and
mhm.
various things. What is the difference between, say, those kind of stretches and um yeah, like something that elicits this pandiculation response?
So often what'll happen during, my sessions when I'm working with a horse is they'll start to spontaneously do pandiculations that you see as kinda like the same things a
Yep.
cat would do. And that's wonderful, but that's not the systematic kind of pandiculations that I'm after because they'll just do whatever they get triggered to do, and that's great, but it might not necessarily involve the muscle group that I've been hired to help, you know? Uh, so this is so interesting, I find, with how the body and the brain works. So we don't need to trigger that kind of a pandiculation to get the result of a pandiculation. We can do a voluntary movement that has all the elements of an involuntary pandiculation, and the nervous system will respond to it as if it's an automatic pandiculation. So that's actually the only reason why somatics works. So the major players in a pandiculation in the body is that it's a contraction of a muscle or a group of muscles and a slow decontraction of that same muscle or group of muscles. And if the decontracting phase of the movement is done slowly enough, it mimics exactly what happens in a pandiculation, and the brain responds to it the same way it does as if it was an automatic pandiculation rather than a voluntary or assisted pandiculation. So that's the good news. All this
Hmm.
geeking out is awesome, and I'm loving this. But I think it's important for you to know and for your listeners to know you don't actually have to know any of this stuff for somatics to work for you or for you to be able to use it to help your horse because this isn't about how much you know. This is just about getting the tools to trigger this reflex in a horse. And then the nervous system actually takes care of all of the complicated stuff. So I think the simplest way I can answer your question even more fully would be to describe to you how you could actually do a simple somatic movement with your horse so that you can feel it. And then you can also visualize, like, actually how simple it is to access this amazing effect. Does that sound good?
Awesome. That sounds great.
Okay. So, in every equine somatic session, we start with a movement that we call the initial pickup. And it's so simple, it's like hard to believe how effective it can be, but I assure you that it is. We're going to ask a horse to pick up and then slowly put down each of its legs. We're going to ask them to repeat the
Mm.
same leg and the same pickup 3 times before moving on to the next leg. And we're going to work all the way and around the horse and do all 4 legs before we stop. It's really important, if you guys are going to try this, that you do all 4 legs when you do it, because this is so effective that if you only do 2 legs, you're going to create suppleness and more uh, muscular length and accessibility in just those 2 legs and their associated muscles. And the difference sometimes can be so extreme and so rapid that then the difference between the legs you worked with and the legs you didn't creates this weird imbalance for the horse. And we
Yep.
don't want that. So anytime you're doing this, you always work in balance in the body, do both sides or all 4 legs. So the difference between this and the way we usually ask a horse to pick up their foot is that we have to remember We're not doing body work. We're trying to get the horse to do something with their own body. So what we need the horse to do is use their own brain to send a signal to the muscles to pick up the leg and keep using their own brain to keep talking to those muscles to slowly put that leg back down and then put the weight on the hoof. So if we do too much to get the horse to pick up their foot, or if we use aids or signals that have become automatic, like depending on how you ask your horse to pick up
Yep.
your foot, if you have a cue like a word, or you snap your fingers, or if you squeeze the chestnut or pull on the fetlock hair or something, you can't use that because that has now become an automatic thing. It's not a voluntary mindful thing. So you got to ask the horse in a very gentle, cooperative way to pick up their foot for you. And as soon as their leg starts moving, you're going to put your hands on it so that you're connected and kind of helping, but not really helping. It's more guiding. And then you're going to, through
Yep.
that guiding feel with the connection through your hands, invite that horse to slowly put that foot back down until they can rest their hoof on the ground. And then if they don't automatically stand their weight back onto it, you do something to get them to stand on it. You can, kind of pull on their mane or push on them a little bit or go to a different foot and act like you're going to pick up that foot so they'll shift the weight
Yep.
back into the front foot, something like that. Whatever seems to work. Um, and then there are just a few other guiding principles we follow. Like, so the horse has to do the movement. We're not going to resist them or offer too much help. Otherwise, our brain is doing it and then the horse isn't doing it anymore. We're not going to use
Yep.
any recognizable habitual cues. We're certainly not going to use food. Uh, and you're also going to be careful to only pick the foot up as high as the horse wants to and can easily. So if the horse barely
Okay.
gets their hoof off the ground, that's as high as they pick it up, and then you slowly get them to put it back down. If they snap their foot up all the way up to their barrel, that's how they do it. You just flow with it and then invite them to slowly put it back down. So we're doing it at their choice, their range of motion, the way they do it is the way they do it right now. We're not trying to change it. We're just trying to get them to put in some effort to trying to put it back down slowly. If they stomp it back down, we don't block it. We just do it again. If they kick
Okay.
and paw and
Okay.
twitch or yank it around or the leg vibrates like the cat does sometimes when they're doing their stretches, that's fine. If you can stay with it and it's safe, you stay with it with your hands. If it's not safe, just get out and just repeat it. We don't want to block
Hmm.
the movement ever because as soon as we start blocking, the horse starts blocking, and now we're both bracing with more muscle tension on each other. And that's that voluntary override to the involuntary system that we do when we sit up to have good posture. Um, and so we don't want to do that because that interferes with the pandiculation. So it's very simple, but it's not that simple. So you invite
Yes,
the horse to
I
pick
was
up
gonna say.
pick up and put down 3 times and then go to the next leg, do that 3 times, then go to the next leg, do that 3 times, maybe 5 times. I mean, it doesn't really matter exactly how many times you do it. Um,
Hmm.
but that would be kind of the most basic movement. And that's something that you can do with any horse every single day. And just doing that, you're going to help the horse reset the resting level of muscle tension in more than 30 different muscles because there are 30 different muscles involved in picking up and putting down the forelimbs and then the hind limbs.
Wow. I'm so excited to try this out. I have a mare that just came into my care who's been dealing with arthritis at the coffin joint and navicular
Mm,
since she was about 4. So I'm like, ooh,
mhm.
can't wait to help her because I
So
notice how different her picking up and putting down is on different legs.
mhm,
So um, she has a lot of a harder time. Her arthritic foot is the left, so the right front is really hard for her to
mhm.
pick up. Um, so yeah, just to clarify, how long typically, like if you were to time it, how long is slow? Like when you say to slowly put it down.
I think the best way I could do that is to kind of time it to your breath. So if you were to take a slow
Okay,
inhale and an even slower exhale, the inhale would be the pickup, the slow exhale would be the put down.
perfect.
And
Perfect. That's really helpful.
as you
Okay.
do it more, you'll start to develop a feel for what it feels like when the horse is moving voluntarily versus when the horse is experiencing a reflex and moving because of a reflex. But that's more than I can get into right now, although that's another super geeky conversation we could have another time. uh, but yeah, so
I'm
specifically for
very into having that conversation.
mare, I want to tell you
Mhm.
two more things about doing this with your mare. So if she has a preference for which
Perfect.
foot she can pick up or put down to start with, go with whatever foot she can pick up easily. And if she can't pick up
Yep.
one of her feet for you lightly without you really asking and kind of making her do it, then just skip that leg for the day. So you always start with the easy foot or the easy side, and then you would never make the horse do this if they
Okay.
were finding it difficult. Um, and then if she's experiencing heel pain, it's going to be extra important that you make sure that when she puts her foot back down that she loads it, because if she doesn't load it,
Yep.
it means she's actually still holding some tension in the deep digital flexor muscle and tendon, and she hasn't let all of that go. And that is something that can contribute
Okay.
to heel pain and even cause the heel pain. So
Yep,
that's
for sure.
extra
For sure.
important.
That's super, super helpful. Okay. I'll try that with her. And I'm sure there's other listeners that can relate to having a horse that's in a rehab space
Mhm.
that this would really, really be effective for. Awesome. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, Alyssa.
It flew by.
It flew by. Yes. And to anyone listening in, this is Alyssa's first podcast ever,
Yep.
which you would never know. You did amazing.
I love talking about this stuff.
Hmm.
And anything that I can do that helps the horses of the world and the people who love them to feel better and function better, that's why I'm here, I think. So happy to
Oh,
share.
yes, you can tell. You can absolutely tell. So thank you for the sharing. I know I learned a ton. I'm sure that my listeners did as well. Yeah, I really appreciated you being here. So thank you for that, and would love you to share how people get in touch with you, how they find your great work. I know that your website is just chock a block with amazing offerings. Yeah, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. There are so many things that I thought we might talk about, and I feel like we talked about one one topic in depth, which I love doing. Um, so I want to give you guys a resource that relates specifically to equine somatics. So because this is kind of a new thing and it's not very well known, a few years ago I collaborated with Eleanor Criswell, the originator of equine somatics, and we made an instructional video designed for the horse owner who's never heard of this work to learn how to do a basic session with your own horse. Because there are, you know, less than 20 people who've gone through our certification program who are actively practicing with horses in the whole world, which means it's very likely you do not have access to an equine somatics practitioner. Um, and that doesn't really work for me because I want every single horse and horse owner to know this stuff because it is so valuable and useful. So
Mhm.
that's why we made this
Mhm.
video. You can download it from equinehanasomatics.org is the website. There's also a list on that website of our
Alright.
certified practitioners, just in case you do have access to one. Then you can potentially get some in-person instruction or get a hands-on session for your horse if you want that. Um, but even in that case, what I usually suggest is people get the video and try it with their horse before scheduling a professional session, because then the practitioner can come in and they can like do the next level of helping your horse. If you've already done the basic
Yep.
session, they can get more done in the professional session. So that's again
Fabulous.
equinehanasomatics.org where you can find that. And we priced the instructional video at $39 for the download, again, because we're super motivated to get it out into the hands of as many people as possible. So it's super accessible.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Great.
And
And what is your website?
my website is just my name, alissamayer.com. And you can also,
And I know you have a few programs, you have a few things coming up. So, yeah, if you want to share a little bit about that before we finish up.
yeah. So the this information and the knowledge I've gained from doing somatics with horses has totally influenced how I do horsemanship and teach horsemanship and riding lessons. And also, of course, this work was developed for use with humans before it was later applied to horses. And I just like learned it the other way around. Um, so it's also extremely valuable for riders. So I have a couple of things that you can get to on my website. If you're a rider and you want to experience somatics in your own body, and again, don't have access to um, local resources, I have two things on the website. One is like a podcast style. So maybe I do have a smidge of experience. It's a podcast style
Yeah.
intro mat class that I recorded for you guys so that you can just download it. It's about 42 minutes long. Um, and it's just me, my voice, guiding you through lying on the floor in your own home and working through your body, doing a basic human somatics session. That's just called my intro mat class. You can find that on the website under the Somatics for Riders tab. And then I also created a more deep dive online course for some of my students who that initial class wasn't quite enough to address what was going on in their body. And also, my own experience in the last couple of years landed me with some chronic back pain that just a full body generic class wasn't enough to address, but this deeper dive where we work through the body in 8 different lessons, focusing on different body parts, um, was what helped me get out of back pain after I had my twins 2 years ago. And
Right.
and it's something that a lot of my students are really finding to be useful. And a lot of people who have nothing to do with horses are also using it to just address things in their body that are not functioning in an ideal manner. So that's called my posture transformation program, or for short, the PTP course, which is open for enrollment now. I left it at a rolling enrollment so that people can get access to it anytime they want. And then for anyone who's
Perfect.
interested in how this information applies to training horses and riding horses, I have a ton of stuff like blog posts and I don't know, videos on YouTube and stuff. But I decided to put a lot of that into one place for you. So I wrote a book, and I've got the book, which is called Inviting an Interspecies Dialogue, available as an ebook for free on my website, just to give you info and insight into how that works. And it's essentially the 5 things that I found myself doing with my clients across the board around the world. The first 5 things that I do with almost every client, whether it's somebody with an Olympic level horse and they want, to help with polishing their performance, or if it's somebody who just bought a new horse and they don't have the kind of connection that they wanted and nothing else is working, or for people who just want to know how this somatic work has influenced the training that I do. And there are a few really specific things that I do very differently now than the way I used to do it before I discovered somatics. So that's all in the book.
Awesome. Sweet. Thank you so much. That's great. So many resources. So I'll post these all at wholehorse.ca under Hannah's episode. And yeah, looking forward to heading over there myself, or under Hannah, I mixed you up with Hannah Thematics there under Alyssa's episode.
Quite a
And
compliment, but not quite.
yeah. Right. Thank you for being here, Alyssa, and thanks to all my listeners for tuning in, and all the listeners for tuning in today and being here. More to come soon. Um, yeah, I hope you're all having a wonderful summer, and we will chat with you again very, very soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
Hi, everybody. Alexa here. I wanted to share with you that the registration page for the Whole Horse Apprenticeship, starting September the 15th, is up and ready to roll. And this is my main program, my fave program, my baby of sorts, and really distills all of the knowledge, amazing collaborations in my world, and ways that I work with horses, all into one 6 month program. I love this program. I have a feeling you will as well. And I hope that you will consider joining us. You can head to www.alexalinton.com/apprenticeship 2020 to find out more. There's just 25 spots, and it would be great to have you there as one of the amazing participants. We already have about 10 spots filled, and loving the group so far. Really, really powerful group of individuals who are advocating for horses and moving forward in their work and their lives with horses. So, message me if you have any questions. Look forward to hopefully seeing you there. Bye for now.